Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us for our 2025 Freight Market Outlook. My name is Mike Beckwith. I'll be the moderator today. For a little bit of background on FreightPlus, we are a managed transportation and brokerage company that focuses on simplifying complex logistics for our clients. Today, we're going to be talking a little bit about the market in terms of the trends, challenges, and opportunities for shippers. We do have the function of adding questions that you have from the webinar today. We're not going to be answering any of those questions during the call, but if you don't mind adding your contact information, we'll definitely be reaching out afterwards to answer any questions that you may have. To get us started on introductions, my name is Mike Beckwith. I'm the Vice President of Brokerage here at FreightPlus. I've been in the industry for about 10 years, focusing on operations, client success, and sales. Brendan, you want to get us started and roll us around?
Yeah, how's it going, everyone? Brendan Lawler. I'm the Senior Director of Operations here at FreightPlus. Been in the industry for close to a decade, spending the majority of my time at Amazon. Most of my experience revolves around client operations, carrier operations, and finance operations. Excited to be here today.
All right, Amber Miller, Vice President of LTL here at FreightPlus. I've been in the industry a little over 19 years and have been at FreightPlus a year in April. Spent most of my career concentrating on LTL.
Hey, everybody, Shane Duncan here, Vice President of Managed Transportation Sales for FreightPlus. Been in the industry for about 25 years in freight in general, been doing managed transportation solutions and sales for about 15 years. Glad to be here.
All right. Well, thanks, everyone. To get us started off in 2025, I'm going to kick this one over to Amber. We've heard some changes coming through for the NMFC, also with density-based calculations. Amber, do you mind giving us a brief overview of what those changes are and what to expect?
Of course. Thank you, Mike. So as most of you know, the NMFTA is transitioning a little over 2,000 single-class NMFC item numbers to a density-based class scale, and that's going to happen in July. So this shift essentially means that freight classification will now rely more heavily on density rather than item-specific classifications. So for shippers, this could bring new challenges such as just recalibrating freight dimensions and understanding how these changes impact costs. One of the most significant impacts will be on the shipping costs. So shippers who don't accurately classify their freight could face unexpected costing. On the bright side, this change actually offers an opportunity for those who have adopted advanced dimensioning tools. So our shippers have asked us, what can we do to prepare? So first, just start integrating advanced dimensioning technology into your processes now. Dimensioning can help you capture accurate dimensions and stay compliant with those new standards that are coming. Second, I would just work closely with the carriers to understand their policies and how they're approaching these changes. So again, we always say it, preparation now will save time, money, and stress later.
I appreciate that, Amber. Pivoting the conversation a little bit, the next thing we're seeing in terms of a trend in the market is some emerging technologies, specifically in automation and freight management. When I first started the industry, I was still using a fax machine just a decade ago, faxing rate tenders and rate confirmations. So it's been incredible to see that growth in the industry over the past decade. But what does the next decade look like? Shane, I'll start with you. What are some of the emerging technologies you're seeing, especially on the managed transportation side, that can be impactful for a lot of clients?
Yeah, that's a great question, Mike. I don't have the full crystal ball here, but I can tell you, if you were doing fax machines 10 years ago, imagine what we were doing 20, 25 years ago when I got into the industry in the small parcel space, right? It's definitely evolved. If you look at the freight industry as a whole, you're right. In the last decade, our industry has kind of been a laggard behind other industries. And you've seen in the last 5 to 8 years, this huge adoption of technology across the space. I was just doing some research get ready for this call, and there's a 2022 survey by the Peerless Research Group that showed, and back then, just 3 years ago, about 25, 26, 30% or so of companies have adopted some form of technology, traditionally a TMS, to manage their freight. Anecdotally, based on our outreach in the sales department here and in previous companies, I'd say it's more like 50% have some form of technology to help out. So there's really been this kind of hockey stick of growth in the last 5 to 8 years. When you think about what's coming, emerging technologies, obviously AI is a hot topic. Everybody is trying to figure out how do you leverage AI, how do you use it the best. And we'll talk more about that as the call goes on. But there's even complete trade shows that are built around technologies, right? And there's one coming up later this quarter. We're going to bring together just a ton of technology companies that are bringing new ideas, innovative ideas to the table for our manufacturing and our customers to take advantage of. So definitely evolving in the AI space. Then you got to look at the adoption of that over the next probably 3 to 5 to 8 years again. So there's going to be this huge push for more and more adoption of technology, and we'll dive in a little bit more of that later on in the call.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd like to kick this over to Brendan as well. Being on the operations side of things, Brendan, we're implementing some of these technologies ourselves. What is the benefits and challenges really look like when it comes to these technologies that we're utilizing and learning this year?
Yeah, I think first to kind of echo Shane's point, adoption in the industry is pretty prevalent right now. Emerging technologies are becoming more accessible. Smaller carriers, smaller shippers, they're able to benefit from these advancements that were, previously limited to, large enterprise companies that were using proprietary software. So that kind of expansion has definitely allowed a wider reach in the industry. I think with technology, there comes a lot of benefits and a lot of challenges, right? I think the overall intent of moving into a more digital environment is automating tasks, load matching, tendering, invoicing. All these components really reduce manual intervention, kind of speeds up that operational process. Another big focus and benefit is enhanced visibility. When you think about something like real-time tracking and that ability to communicate to a customer or shipper in a digital environment, vice over email or phone call, really brings in that real-time visibility, improves that transparency between shippers, carriers, and customers. And then I think, the overall intent and the overall benefit is really scalability. Digital platforms enable companies to scale their operations more effectively, with that return on investment, really streamlining their workflows, reducing administrative burdens. But it is challenging, right? I think, Shane touched on the transportation management system. You're seeing a lot of integrations between ERPs, TMSs, WMSs. So integration is absolutely a huge focus in the industry right now, but that comes with challenge, right? Legacy systems may struggle to integrate with, some of these modern new platforms that you're going to see at a trade show like Manifest, which can create, bottlenecks and data silos. There's initial upfront costs. Technology is expensive to implement. You need to invest in it. It often requires significant, upfront investment from personnel, from that initial implementation costs, which can be a barrier for smaller companies. And then the third challenge, I think we've felt it as we've invested in technology, and I think it's important to start, but the change management is certainly a challenge, right? There's going to be resistance to change, especially when you're talking about an operations team. There's lack of technical expertise, which can slow adoption. That rep that has been doing the same thing for 10 years may be less inclined to adopt into that more technologically savvy approach. So, the change management is always going to be a barrier when implementing new technology, Mike.
Yeah. Well, sorry, Shane, I don't interrupt.
I'll say, if I can jump in there, just kind of following up on Brendan's point, just you've identified that you need technology, right? You're either you've adopted it already or kind of a laggard. So you put it in, you go through the challenges of change management, you get it installed, you've made the investment. Now you've got all this information at your fingertips, right? You got data you've never had before. You've harnessed some of that information out of the systems and the tools and the software that you put in place. Now, what do you do with it, right? You've got all this information. Like, how does it drive either operationally, like better route optimization, better demand forecasting? How does it become actionable, right? And some of the companies that implement the technology, they struggle. How do we make this actionable data and usable insights? So how do we drive efficiencies across operations? How do we make better decisions? How do we keep our customers happy. At the end of the day, a lot of the senior folks we talk to talk about customer retention and servicing the customer better. We're all kind of in this Amazon effect world now. Amazon's got tremendous amounts of data on all of us and our behavior and all that stuff. So now that we bring these technologies to the manufacturing distribution space and they're adopting these, how do customers then use that to drive efficiencies, drive to better demand forecasting, to drive to better decision making, ultimately to keep customers happy and retain and grow those customer bases? I think that's one of the bigger challenges as well. Like once you kind of decide to jump in, okay, now what?
And I think to that point, Shane, that's why, preaching to my team, and I've been an advocate of this over the years, is really being tech enabled and not tech dependent. So when you're implementing those systems, understanding that you still have to have an audit mechanism in place to ensure that those are operating appropriately. You need that human element. This is a very much people-driven business. You can't lose that human trust between your customers and your carriers. So I think that's a great point as well, Shane.
Yeah, I think that mantra of being tech enabled, not tech dependent, is a bit of a FreightPlus mantra around here, because we do blend the good combination of tech and people together. And that's sometimes it's a bit of a challenge. Some people think, oh, you put the technology in place, all your problems are solved. No, you're right, Brandon. This is a people-driven business. It always will be. It's relationship-driven at the customer level and the carrier level and all the moving parts in between.
And you guys bring up some good points there. What we've seen on the customer sales side is an increasing appetite for data analytics and transparency. And I know we've even seen regulations being proposed this year about transparency. But when we talk about data analytics, especially as we talk about transparency and being able to arm clients with those data insights to be able to manage their supply chain with. Brendan, I'll kick this over to you from an operational standpoint. What kind of efficiency gains are we really looking for with those analytics? What are we trying to produce? What are we trying to really gain when it comes to that visualization?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think you need to use data in 2025. Data is critical to your success, and sometimes too much data can be overwhelming. So I really like to break down data into two major components. Using data in a somewhat of a proactive way, but based on historical data. So using your data analytics to identify key performance indicators. Where do you have bottlenecks in your operations? Where do you need to make proactive adjustments to improve efficiency when you're reviewing your historical data? So really taking that data and then turning it into actionable impacts into your operation is really critical. The second way to really use data, and this is where you're starting to see a lot of buzz around AI and machine learning applications, but using it for predictive analytics. So, using historical data to drive a model that then predicts in some shape or form the future, that can really help you support in things like better capacity planning. Shane touched on, demand forecasting. That is a huge movement in the shipper community right now. Looking at where you can improve in terms of load optimization opportunities. There's all these different components, bringing in the market impacts, right? All these different components that you can leverage from a predictive standpoint to really drive some success in your business and kind of make early decisions based on some insights rather than having to always be somewhat reactive.
I think that's a great segue into our next point. When we talk about economic indicators and market conditions, it all comes back to decision making, right? So Brendan, I'll start off with you. When we talk about what we're experiencing in the economy today, and we talk about especially data analytics, right? We do and are forecasting the market to shift this year back into what we would call an inflationary market, where capacity's potentially going to get strained and be imbalanced when it comes to demand. Are we seeing any indicators today that are really producing those results, and what does that really tell us in the data?
Yeah, so I think we're constantly monitoring a few indicators, both on the supply side as well as on the demand side. I think the first indicator that is definitely certainly a signal right now for a market shift is rejection rates. Rejection rates have risen above 5% for the first time really since late 2022. And typically, we like to say once you crest that 5%, you're starting to see a market shift. Currently we're at 7%. We peaked at 10% in December. This is definitely kind of signaling an impending inflationary market shift. Unlike in prior years in the deflationary market when we saw weather or national disasters, there wasn't that major spike in tender rejections. And even the recent weather that we've seen, we have seen that spike, which is kind of really showing that the supply is market driven. There's going to be structural changes to the market upcoming. I think on the demand side, it's a little bit different, right? We're constantly looking at really two things: imports and industrial production. Right now, they're slightly divergent indicators. Imports are up year over year. Industrial production has declined, so it's creating a kind of a mixed demand signal. Industrial production, and Mike, I know you know this better than anyone, but it's critical for freight demand. It really drives the manufacturing life cycle from raw materials all the way to the end consumer. And honestly, import volumes are expected to normalize, really kind of limiting that long-term demand growth. So we're really having a strong eye on demand coming in 2025. Because on the supply side, there has been a pretty steady carrier market adjustment. Carrier capacity has exited the market for the past 2 years. There was a 14-month consecutive net authority account. It's a little bit slower than anticipated, to be honest. Really, if you think about inflation, the truck orders that we're seeing, the deflationary spot rates that were kind of pushing smaller fleets into losses, it's taken a little bit longer than really anticipated. Banks are extending loan terms in anticipation for a market flip. Larger fleets are absorbing displaced drivers, keeping kind of payroll employment high. But overall, I think, Mike, the market's balanced. And I think any uptick in demand could really lead to some rapid changes.
Yeah, and you bring up some good points there, and to bring it full circle for our shipping partners that may be on the call. As you pointed out, we've seen carriers slowly exit the market last year as demand has really been very muted, right? To your point about industrial production, that's been down year over year, and that's really the biggest indicator for us that really represents demand in the transportation market for us. To bring that again full circle, you talked about rejection rates at the beginning of this. We're running into a scenario now where customers have really, it's about time we start dusting off that playbook when it comes to KPI scorecarding, reviewing acceptance rates. Luckily in the last 2 to 3 years, a lot of shippers haven't had to worry about that because of the continued deflation that we saw in the market. But as we look for a shift this year to take place, any kind of insights that you would give a shipper, Brendan, on how to prepare for a market shift and what you would consider as a way to strategize with your supply chain and capacity sourcing strategies?
Yeah, I mean, first it comes down to building strong carrier partnerships. I think if you were sticking with that carrier network during a deflationary market and not always chasing kind of the spot market, you're going to be in a good place for 2025. And if you are chasing the spot market, this is the time to really start building those strong carrier relationships. Partner with reliable carriers, diversify your carrier network. Start to avoid over reliance on a single carrier or a certain fleet mix. Look at leveraging a large fleet. Look at leveraging small carriers. Look at using digital fleet platforms to expand your carrier network. I think that is going to be really critical moving into 2025 in terms of making sure that you have the capacity that you need as the market flips. Having those kind of core carriers, locking in some contracted pricing is going to really give you that price stability in the long run here in 2025.
Yeah, and when we talk about recent indices that we've been reviewing, I think one of the most fascinating things I've seen this year, or in the past year rather, was typically you see weather events play a role with some of our metrics and our indicators that we look at. To your point earlier, with the continuation of excess capacity in the market that's been exiting out, things like hurricanes last year that we normally see causes rates rise, rejection rates rise, and capacity kind of move around the country to support disaster relief needs and things of that nature. Those were essentially muted last year. What we usually see is those proxies react to those weather changing events. But last year, I would argue that a lot of the carrier community was able to absorb a lot of that overflow and a lot of that change of demand. Where this year, especially as the winter weathers came about, it's the first time we've really seen capacity be affected by it. It's the first time we've seen really rejection rates rise as a result of a weather event. So as we look at the impact of freight rates and capacity, to summarize where we're at right now, I think we're all saying it, is that we're basically at equilibrium. We're very balanced when it comes to the supply and demand side of the business. But what is to be anticipated for this year as we go into more of a balanced supply and demand type market?
I think, like you said, we're at equilibrium. I think outlook for 2025, prepare for rate increases. We anticipate an inflationary market shift in 2025. We'll see, spot rates accelerate upward, followed by contract rates. I think to navigate this transition, it remains critical to secure that contracted capacity for stable capacity and kind of less price volatility is going to be really important in 2025.
Yeah. And just to pivot a little bit here, as we look towards the future, obviously there's some geopolitical events taking place, some regulatory changes that we anticipate. Brendan, do you mind walking us through a little bit of what you're seeing, what we're hearing, and what to expect for this year?
Yeah, I think two things that I know I'm monitoring closely is fuel prices, and then potential impacts from tariffs. I think when you think about domestic drilling policies, the current administration stance is on favoring domestic drilling. That's expected to drive down fuel prices. That can have an impact on freight costs. Lower fuel prices directly reduce operational costs for carriers. So I think this could ease cost pressures for both carriers and shippers in the short term. There is some market implications. If fuel prices remain low, that could definitely temporarily offset some of the inflationary pressure in the freight market that we're anticipating. And then, when you think about potential tariff impacts on imports, there is ongoing potential for new tariffs or adjusting to existing tariffs, which could directly impact the cost and volume of imports. Higher tariffs generally lead to reduced import volumes as you think about companies adjust their sourcing strategies or more try to move domestic and absorb higher costs. Obviously, a lot of that has some pretty significant downstream effects for the transportation industry. Reduced import volumes could ripple through the freight market, leading to decreased demand for trucking, specifically tied to port or some of these long haul distribution of imported goods. So, that's relatively concerning, given the current reliance on imports really to sustain demand, especially during declining industrial production. So I think there's certainly some uncertainty for shippers and carriers, and we'll start to see it a little bit more in the upcoming months. But, regulatory unpredictability really adds complexity to forecasting and freight demand and capacity planning. So, it's super, super important for shippers and carriers to monitor the developments very closely and really stay agile as some of these things come to light.
Yeah, and you bring up a good topic there too. When it comes to regulatory changes or different geopolitical issues, they do play a role with our market first and foremost. And what we're looking at now, when we look at our forecast, we forecast out based on all things remaining equal, all things remaining the same, right? And right now, when we're reviewing the forecast, we're seeing that we're just on really the cusp of seeing a market flip. We expect, Q2 and Q3 to bring some volatility, especially as produce enters the market at the beginning of Q2. But really, again, what it comes down to is really that industrial production metric. When we start to see manufacturing come back to life, and we start to see more demand for raw materials and finished goods and inventory replenishment, that's when I think we should anticipate starting to see some true volatility and a true market shift come to the market. But for our last little bit here, while we have some time together, I want to bring us all back together to really talk through some of the challenges and opportunities for 2025 that shippers can take advantage of. Brendan, you being on the operations side, let's talk a little bit about the capacity side in terms of opportunities and challenges to really kind of bring us all together.
Yeah, I think for the capacity side, it's a good opportunity to really look to establish long-term contracts to kind of help really that price volatility that we were talking about kind of in the market update. I think that's going to be really critical for shippers. You may pay a little bit more in the short term in Q1 and early Q2, but you'll start to see that really help your cost competitiveness as you get into the later part of the year. I think you're going to start to see the load to truck to ratio change. It's going to be harder to go out and get a truck to move your freight. So I think really developing those partnerships with third-party logistics companies, with carriers, that's going to be really important to ensure that you do have capacity at the right time when you need it. I think we talked about data. It's going to be critical that you have a good understanding of your forecast demand, and that you are baking in your capacity needs ahead of time to really minimize disruption in your supply chain. It is not going to be as easy as it has been in the past 2 years to go secure a truck. And I think there's going to be a little bit more intentional planning around capacity in order to continue to move your supply chain effectively.
Yeah, you bring up a great point when it comes to building strong relationships with your carrier base. Amber, would love to kick this over to you for the LTL side. What does that look like for developing relationships when it comes to that LTL freight management?
This is my favorite topic. So just building your stronger carrier relationships isn't even a nice to have anymore. I think we've now transitioned to it's absolutely essential just for navigating the challenges like capacity constraints and even rate volatility. At the heart of these partnerships is just transparent communication. We've talked about it before. We continue to talk about it. When shippers are clear and honest with their needs, challenges, expectations, it just allows the carriers to act as true partners rather than just service providers, which is what we want. So sharing things like your forecast, order patterns, or even unexpected disruptions, it just fosters that trust and keeps everyone aligned. Another key element is creating mutual benefits. So just think outside the box. Think about ways to make the relationship work for both sides. For example, offer consistent freight volumes or backhaul opportunities that can actually improve the carrier efficiency. In turn, that can help you secure better rates and even more reliable service. Finally, there's performance and accountability. You guys talked about KPIs before. So setting those clear KPIs and just conducting those regular reviews with your carriers will ensure that both sides stay aligned on your goals. These reviews are a great way to identify areas for improvement and celebrate success. So something I always like to keep in mind is remember to bring the praises to the table and not just the opportunities for improvements. Very big on both sides. And in 2025, those who invest in those partnerships will be better positioned, especially with the challenges, and to help you maintain stability.
And when we're talking about KPIs, we're talking about performance metric. Obviously, we're looking to build these relationships to be able to be agile, to be flexible, and allow for our businesses to be scalable. Shane, kicking it over to you from the managed transportation side, how are you working with our clients today, focusing on tactics for improving flexibility and scalability within their business and supply chains?
Yeah, it's a great topic. I mean, I'm more shipper focused. Like you guys are talking a lot about carriers and the economy and the geopolitical side of it. I mean, a lot of my conversations are with shippers directly. And everything that you guys have talked about here, kind of working in concert, brings flexibility and opportunities for improvement. So when all that's happening, it creates nimbleness and scalability for our shippers. What I challenge shippers to do is take inventory of your current state. Like, what are you thinking about today? Like, how are you evaluating your carrier relationships? How are you doing all these things? Are you operating in best practices? Not only just with your carrier base, but just within your four walls. Are you optimizing processes? There's tremendous amounts of opportunities and challenges to a degree of making those changes. But when you do, and you invest in the time, effort, and energy to do that, and then outline like a kind of a current state versus future state of what maybe layering in technologies and managed transportation solutions like ours and others, how do you elevate the game, so to speak? Like, how do you go from where you were even last year with all the changes that Brendan and Amber and you, Mike, just talked about? How do you prepare for the future to be flexible for your customers, be flexible internally? How do you scale the business? If you're in growth mode, then how do you grow and scale the business up where you don't have to potentially invest in tremendous amounts of overhead, hiring, et cetera? So I think there's really a great opportunity, especially when the market's still kind of low. I mean, we're seeing the uptick in rates and all those things happen. But while the market's still relatively low, now's a great time to take inventory of it early in the year, evaluate your program, and then see where those opportunities for improvement are, and then go out, and source some partners like us and others, and get the conversation started. How do you increase your flexibility to serve your customers better? How do you scale the business up? I think there's just tremendous amounts of opportunity that exists today.
Yeah. And a lot of what you talk about is really just preparation and planning, right? We're talking about preparing for the unknown variables that could happen. One of the variables we saw in 2023 and especially in 2024 is fraud has been rampant. We've seen that pick up and increase year over year. They're getting more savvy with being able to spoof other individuals' contact information to pretend that they work for organizations with malicious intent, right? So risk management, fraud prevention is one of the challenges we haven't discussed yet, but it's definitely a variable, an unknown variable that a lot of companies are starting to really look at and have strategies to prepare for. Brendan, for you on really the truckload capacity sourcing side, what type of practices would you recommend in terms of risk management? What are we seeing today, and what type of strategies are we using even to be able to curb some of this behavior that we're seeing in the market?
Yeah, fraud. I mean, fraud is the worst that I've seen it since I've been in the industry, and I think we talked about technology, and it's interesting. This is kind of technology, hurting the industry to a certain degree. A lot of the fraud is occurring in kind of this digital environment. So I think there's a lot of practices that need to be put in place in order to prevent it. I think first thing is really, starting with making sure that you're establishing really minimum carrier qualifications. Do they have the authority requirements? Do they have their verified documentation? Are they maintaining acceptable, safety ratings, right? I think initially having those minimum qualifications to see if there's any red flags is pretty critical. Then, carrier vetting, rigorous carrier vetting is as important as it's ever been right now when you think about fraud in the truckload market. And I think leveraging some of the tooling that exists in the marketplace right now is a must-have. You need to be leveraging Carrier 411. You need to be leveraging Highway, Carrier Sure. I mean, RMIS, any of these platforms that, really do provide that comprehensive carrier risk assessment, but you need to be leveraging those tools to verify that contact information isn't changing, that insurance isn't lapsing. All those components are really important. A carrier can really funnel through the background in a digital environment, change the email, and all of a sudden now you're emailing to a different email that's not actually the carrier's, and there's fraud occurring in real time right there. So I think carrier vetting is really important, and then really training your team, whether at the shipper or the broker level, on a robust onboarding process. You need to be leveraging the tooling. You need to be verifying insurance. You need to be verifying contact information. You need to be verifying safety scores. And I think having those systems, conducting continuous monitoring is also important. Did that insurance lapse? did I just recently get a Freight Guard report that there was a double broker incident on this carrier? I think all those things are really, really important to do on a load by load basis at this point to ensure that you have the appropriate carrier moving your freight. And I think it's equally as important on the shipper side. I think one of the things that we've really put into place is kind of that authentication with the shipper. If you're moving high theft freight, high value freight, you should be verifying, that bill of lading with the carrier name, the MC number, getting the driver's license number, all those components, really doing that final check on the ground at the loading dock that, the carrier that was slated to pick up your freight is the one, in fact, actually picking it up. So I think this is a multi-dimensional issue right now. And I think there's just a lot of really stringent pieces that you need to put in place in order for you to eliminate fraud within your business.
Yeah, I mean, what you speak to is really the process of due diligence has been a little bit nuanced these past couple of years in light of all the fraud we've been seeing in the market. But yeah, just to wrap things up here with everyone here, I'd like to end with one of the initiatives we've seen over the past couple of years that may still be an initiative for some of our shippers joining us on the call. Really talking about the sustainability and green freight initiatives. Shane, you mind giving us a little bit of background on really what that is and how that applies to some of our shipper strategies that we see today?
Yeah, sure. No problem. I think it was a hot topic a couple of years ago, kind of died down. Now it's come back. It's made a resurgence. And there's really some practical things that shippers can look at in terms of driving sustainability, green initiatives, et cetera. I mean, there are some companies that track this stuff very well, and some even put in for, some awards on how they've driven sustainability within their programs. But just a couple of things we'll mention here, and I know Brandon probably talked about some of them, but promoting smart way programs within your carrier base. I mean, that's kind of a tactical thing you can do. How do you track and improve environmental performance? How do you optimize? I mean, again, it goes back to technology a little bit, but how do you optimize your routes and your trucks and stuff? How do you do optimization on mode? How do you convert LTLs into larger LTLs into multi-stop truckloads? I mean, all those things add up to sustainability and carbon abatement and carbon emission reduction because you're taking loads off the road and reducing the amount of trucks that bump your dock. I mean, all those things add up to obviously time savings as well. But that's another idea. Shifting modes are more sustainable, such as rail for long haul. That's another idea that can impact your sustainability initiatives. One that's probably a little bit more challenging to do, but very impactful is, collaborating with other shippers. And so you co-load freight to reduce waste and space on trucks. The statistics have shown over the years that, 50% of trucks run around half empty, half full. And I mean, that's a lot of wasted space that's moving. You're driving past an 18-wheeler, the likelihood of that truck being full is 50%. So there's a lot of things that shippers can do when they lean into it. And working with companies like ours and all the moving parts that you guys have all talked about, we can bring that together and put together a program for you. But shippers can take the initiative to look at those themselves and make sure that you are working with carriers that care about the environment. Are they doing their part to drive sustainability, support the environment, and reduce waste?
Yeah, and you bring up a good segue there, Shane. When you talk about opportunities in the market, some shippers are taking the strategy of looking for outsource support. What does that really look like for us working with shippers today, and then how can some of those shippers take advantage of those same strategies?
Well, that's the core of our business. I mean, at the end of the day, I think you started the call off saying we're a managed transportation provider. There's others out in the marketplace. Our customers love us and they tell us we're the best. But here's what I would say about our model and just FreightPlus in general. And the model in general, managed transportation, outsourced logistics, whatever you want to call it, a rising tide lifts all ships. And so all the moving parts that we've discussed here today, whenever I think about the conversations we have with senior leadership, I've kind of jotted down some notes here just to make sure I hit them home, is whenever we're talking to senior leaders, there's kind of three main buckets I'd say they focus on. And this is like, executive level corporate initiatives, right? How do we grow the company profitably and scale the company and control hiring and expenses? How do we keep my customers? I mean, that's a big one. There's a lot of competition out there. And then what is putting either of those two things at risk? And I think you guys did a great job talking through just a list of there's fraud out there. There's so many things that could happen. The industry with the tech is becoming a little more, I guess, smart in the way they can, create fraud and scams and things like that. So everything we've talked about today just really, let our customers obsess over what they do well with their core competencies, which is making product. Let us focus on and obsess about what we do every day, which is managed freight. I mean, that's at the end of the day, that's what managed transportation is about. And, partner with the right groups that understand your initiatives and goals. That's really our core business, and that's what we focus on. So, if you haven't thought about the model, again, take inventory of what you're doing today and see if it makes sense.
Well, appreciate that, Shane. And thank you all the panelists for joining us here today. Just to kind of summarize some of the key takeaways, obviously we've talked a lot about, both opportunities and challenges in the market. There's a lot of opportunities to, again, dust off that carrier scorecard playbook, that shipper of choice playbook as we enter into an inflationary market. There's opportunities for data visibility, increased due diligence to prevent from fraud. But obviously, at the same time with fraud, there's challenges, right? There's some geopolitical issues ahead of us. Also, some of the indicators we're watching very closely could pose some trouble for the market in the future, especially for our shipper community when it comes to contract acceptance rates and routing guide deterioration. But thank you everyone for joining us on the call, especially again, going back to the questions. If you have any, please insert those for us. We'll definitely reach back out to you. You can get more information on us at www.freightplus.io, or you can scan the QR barcode in the top corner. Thanks again, and hope everyone has a great new year.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.